So thank you very much. My name is Alexander Holt, Scottish Government, and this session is around cross-border collaboration. So it's about, why we should do it, what are the drivers, how do we sell this back into our organizations, and yes, this is an international event, but we are obviously of a mindset which is looking up and out. How do we sell that collaboration back into organizations that are focused on domestic agendas? So I have a brilliant panel with me. So first up, Jamie Berryhill from OECD, Sylvia Romanelli at the International Institute for Public Policy, Innovation for Public Policy at the UCL, and then me, Weile, from the Technical University of Denmark. So just to remind you, we have Slido here. I'm really keen, because we always have these panel sessions, and you leave the questions for the last 2 minutes at the end from the audience. Please fire in now with any questions you'd like to have and what you get out of this session, because that way we'll be able to jam our way through and pick out some of the points that you're specifically interested in. So probably just a little more further intro about your organizations and a bit of context. So Jamie, first.
Sure. Thank you, Alex. Hi, everybody. My name is Jamie Berryhill. I work for the OECD's Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. And at OPSI, as we call it, we really focus on working with governments to explore new techniques, new approaches, new technologies, and transforming themselves for better policies, better services. Related to this session in particular, my team and I spent about a year working specifically on the topic of cross-border innovation for the public sector, where we did, through kind of 2 tracks of research and an open crowdsourcing exercise, analyzed 250 different case studies of public sector innovation across borders going on. We also convened workshops with about 150 different hands-on practitioners around the world to learn about, what is happening in cross-border innovation, and compared to other types of innovation, why isn't it happening more? We issued 3 reports on this topic, one on governance structures for cross-border challenges, one on surfacing insights and experimenting across borders, and one on the hands-on, kind of where the rubber meets the road, delivery and implementation of impactful cross-border solutions. Each one of those has various sub-themes and case studies and examples woven through it that I'd recommend you, if you're interested in the topic, to access. You can see those all at cross-border at oecd-opsi.org, and then see me afterwards if you didn't catch that. But in terms of specific examples, we see a lot of different bilateral and multilateral approaches to innovation. The OECD is, since 50s, been a multilateral organization, but focusing on collaboration to innovate the public sector. Some great examples that we've seen, and some of my favorites, and ones we have case studies on in the reports are, one is the Open European Dialogue, which really is a network of parliamentarians across Europe from members of different countries, opposing parties, potential enemies in some fora, but in this case working together using innovative techniques and facilitation to collaborate on ideas and initiatives. Another project that we cover is the Deep Space Food Challenge, which is a more of a one-on-one effort between the United States, NASA, and the Canadian Space Agency on incentivizing innovators to address gaps in the field of food production in space, which has spillover effects at home. And which really focuses on the importance of mapping common interests and goals and leveraging the crowd. A lot of it's a crowdsourcing exercise. Another one is focused kind of more on the topic in the room, on the X-Road Trust Federation, so lifting the X-Road platform that's been talked about a ton in Estonia to the international level and trying to connect in interoperable ways and building cross-border foundations for data. And then finally, we did a case on the Global Scale-Up Program, which you'll hear about a lot today, which tackles from design and the earliest stages the issue of scalability, which is what I would call the failure point in a lot of these efforts that we did see and did analyze, is never really considering that up front and how you broaden those out beyond small efforts. So with that, I'll pass it back to Alex.
Brilliant. Jamie, thank you very much. So, delighted, Chris, thank you very much for firing in with the first question around how can governments actively, hands-on, work together on GovTech developments. And I'm delighted to say we have a brilliant case study. We'll be able to talk about that. So thank you for coming in for that, Chris, wherever you are. Somewhere at the back. There we are. Excellent. Good. Okay, so Jamie made a reference there to something called the Global Scale-Up Program. And this, if I take my moderator hat off for a second, but just give a little explainer around this. So I work for the Scottish Government and put together about 7 years ago something called CivTech Scotland, which was the first GovTech program in Europe. And from there, we built up international networks from other governments looking to learn from how we had done this. And then 2.5 years ago, just before the pandemic set in, we saw the opportunity of actually bringing some of these teams together and forming an alliance in this space, a community of practice, shall we say. And in those first 9 months, there were weekly video calls, sharing best practice, supporting each other. And of course, many of these programs are trying to change government, a shoulder to cry on when we're against the brick wall of bureaucracy. And we saw an opportunity, and that was how can you move from a knowledge network to a collective capability? So how could we make use of the best practice, the expertise, the know-how, the networks to help both people, and in this case, the planet? So the Global Scale-Up Program was geared in the run-up to COP26, where we wanted to source, surface, and scale climate tech solutions for global public sector application. So we ran this program involving 10 countries, selecting 18 companies from 9 countries, and then taking them through a program where they got introduced to stakeholders and investors and key folks from each regional innovation ecosystem. So 69 engagement sessions with 100, hope that's not my time up, with 100 organizations and over 200 plus introductions to then present at COP last year in Glasgow, and we're running it again this year in Egypt. So we'll be on stage end of next week in the Green Zone. So an overview of how you then bring government and innovation teams together. So I'm going to hand over to Sylvia to talk a bit about your role as a program participant. So as one of the multilateral contributors, why did you do it and what did you get out of it?
Thank you, Alexander, and hello, everyone. Just a quick intro about myself. For the past years, I've been working at the intersection of international relations, public policy, and science and technology and innovation policies. So working for UN agencies, startup, and then my first hands-on experience on international collaborations for ST, and I was working as the head of entrepreneurship and innovation at the Swiss Next network in Brazil, which is a public-private initiative linked to the Swiss State Secretariat for Research, Education and Innovation. And then after that, I joined the InvestSP, which is the Investment and Promotion and Competitiveness Agency of the state of São Paulo. So in that role, from an investment and competitiveness promotion agency, I was advising the state government of São Paulo in Brazil on establishing international collaborations in those fields. That's when I got to join the Global Scale-Up Program as a programming partner, as Alexander mentioned. I just recently moved to the UK to join the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at the University of College London. But then I got back to my experience taking part at this program, which was a very concrete case of international collaboration, especially in the environmental field, because last year we had COP26, and of course everyone is like talking about it, discussing about it, but one thing is really, getting around a meeting and having good ideas. Another thing is really taking that into action and implementing a program that involved 10 countries. So I think that the most challenging and yet exciting part of it, as an innovation specialist implementing innovation policies, sometimes, and I think it's the reality for most of us, we know we tend to fit some solutions we are very comfortable with into the problems. But there's no way you can do that when you are in a Zoom conference with a dozen of organizations thinking, in completely different aspects. So the framing of the program itself was already very an enriching process, because we knew we had to build a program that would be, attractive to both the private sector, both the scale-ups and the startups, the innovative firms, but also that had to be interesting for policymakers, and that's not an easy balance to reach. So by taking part of this programming, we joined this network, as Alexander was mentioned, that used to be a knowledge exchange network into a practical program, because we realized, okay, each one of us is already running their acceleration programs. What if we join, and then we can, take this collective capability to really launch a global GovTech acceleration program that would select, would source the best solutions from all over the world, and potentially have those solutions being applied everywhere. So I think that's the beauty of it, because if we're talking about climate change is a very complex and borderless problem. So why should the solutions just be local? It's a bit what we heard from the first panel. So it was a very enriching experience, because we managed to coordinate a lot of organizations with different backgrounds. We had organizations from representing academia, we had civil society organizations, we had governments at different levels. And this was really interesting, because it was also because of this diversity of actors that we managed to offer something that really added value to all stakeholders involved. So I think we can go, we can talk the whole day about it, but it was for me, because we see a lot of bilateral cooperations, but what the GSUP did was putting together organizations with different mandates from different countries, and and make it really happen. So I think it's a very good case. If there's one thing that we want you to leave the room with, is the idea that, yes, we can talk a lot, but it's another things when we really, try to combine our values and interests, and it is possible to be done.
Sylvia, thanks very much. Here's a quick question for the audience. Who here has been involved in cross-border collaborations? Which ones are bilateral? So 2 parties. And which ones are multilateral? Multilateral, okay, so most people are involved in terms of multilateral. Have you found it easy and straightforward? So I think one of the questions here is, what were the success factors? So Robert, you've asked that, exchanging ways of working. We're going to come on to that, about some of our top tips and the lessons learned from the program. But in terms of your work at the Technical University of Denmark, which is rated number 2 behind MIT in terms of social impact and collaboration, so a very highly esteemed institution, you were looking at things from a slightly different angle. That we observe these innovation programs, but actually what does it take to deliver in terms of the competencies, the skill sets of people involved? And I think that's, again, Sylvia, to your point, there's lots of talk, and actually we'd like to see a bit more walk, maybe even some running, but actually, what do you need to do to make that happen? Mi, what were your insights?
Thank you, Alexander. So nice to meet you all. My name is Weile. I'm from the Technical University of Denmark, and I have to make a disclaimer. I'm so sorry. I'm not an engineer. I'm actually a master's degree in human resources, and I've put myself into the most technical department, the Department of Computer Science and Mathematics, to actually try and bring the perspectives of how can we start having a shared language so that we start having democratizing of our technologies. And that's why we've kind of also gone into this program as a partner, because we do believe that it's really needed for academia to take place in those discussions that are going around on how to bring in new tech and get the newest tech, so also get the students to be interested in GovTech. And as Alexander is saying, we're looking very much into how do you actually build a digital mindset. And on the GSOP, and I'm really thankful for that, we got to actually make a study on it and also make a report on it. And you can come to me afterwards and you can get what the insights were on it.
Available in all good bookshops.
But one of the learnings were that these kind of GovTech initiatives that go across borders, they actually bring a lot of knowledge to the participants, but also bring knowledge within the different parties taking part in it. So we need to have sectors, all sectors involved, because that's how we also can create a shared language. So we found 8 competencies, and I'll just find the competence page on it, on what does it actually take to drive these kind of programs. And I don't have my glasses on, but we found that it was entrepreneurship that we need to be agile, a technology knowledge, communication, leadership, networking, organizing, and public sector knowledge. That's the core needs for actually being able to have a success on these programs. And we looked into why do the companies participate, why do the public sector partners participate, and it was all with a very strong why. They all wanted to do a change. And I think Sylvia touched on that, saying, you know, we can talk a lot, but taking the action, proving that it's possible, that was a strong, strong thing that all of them said. And then we also looked into how can you actually create the program? So what do you need to do to build it? And culture was one of the really central things, that you have to build and utilize culture as one of the drivers if you want to have people to collaborate across different countries, across different sectors, and bring in this really strong leadership and visionary leadership. So I think that was just shortly some takes.
Thank you, Mi. And just on that piece of cultural, some of the stuff that we learned during the course of this was that when you're engaging with countries and they're themselves engaging with their stakeholders, there's a sense of timing. When are the good times to engage and when not? And it turned out that Denmark goes to sleep, literally shuts down in July. Spain shuts down in August. Turns out the Baltics aren't great fans of doing video sort of testimonials, or pitches. And so you have this myriad of different sort of cultural complexities that you're then spinning. But let's just examine the why bit. So, Mi, you talked about people from within an organization, you know, having a personal sense of drive to wanting to change. But Jamie, how, in a context now when budget cuts are absolutely here, we've seen in the context a number of programs being scaled back. Often, internationalization is put on the nice to have, not the should have or must have. So when we think about the context of driving these programs across borders, how do we actually make that sell-in to our own organization? What's the why, the drivers for organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that this was something we talked a lot about in these workshops where we convened people together and that we tried to cover in our work, and that we hope people can take to use as a bit of leverage to push on these types of efforts. I think that in the projects that we saw, like there was just a strong feeling from people who have gone through them that it did lead to better outcomes. And it was actually much more efficient and effective because they were able to leverage each other and to share infrastructure and share resources and initiatives. And then also the ones that have lasted the longest, these types of efforts tend to be more sustainable. There's more hands involved, there's more people pushing for success, more people come to depend on the initiatives and the efforts. So they tend to be more sustainable in the long run because there's more people behind and kind of pushing for them. And the potential for scalability is very high as well. So being able to take these, if done right, which we'll talk about, I think, in the success factors, and building in the concepts of scalability and what scalability means from the early onsets, they can make a tremendous impact across government, whether within the same country or the multiple different countries coming together. And then I think that there's also a big aspect of it that is spillover benefits. These projects bring people together in closer ways than they worked before. They build trust, they build relationships that can be leveraged for other projects, other initiatives, things in the future, things going on in a different office. So they bring partners together in ways that they perhaps didn't think about doing before, that has less calculable, less measurable benefits, but that have been seen and witnessed and felt by the people who have engaged in these types of projects.
And that whole concept of spillover is really interesting one. For those who, people read Mariana Mazzucato's Entrepreneurial State? Sure, yeah. A Bible for many of us in this area. I mean, Sylvia, that's absolute, that whole spillover piece is critical. What have you observed around the spillover, particularly from a Brazilian perspective, where you were a number of organizations that came together?
Yeah, I think I would like break down also this answer into, because there are the factors that are our why, and I mean also building on what Jamie said, we know we work with very limited resources, being financial, time-wise, or human. So there's no way we could, for instance, individually, each organization that took part of the program achieve the outcomes, the results, and the access that the program achieved as a collective effort. So, for instance, and just to give you perhaps a little bit of more of context, so last year we ran this program in 8 months, and at the end we selected 18 scale-ups that were addressing 3 main environmental challenges related to COP, so food waste, decarbonization, and adaptation and resilience. And all of those 18 companies, they went through immersion weeks in each of the ecosystems of the countries that were part of the program. So you can imagine like having Brazilian startups that we selected, gaining access to policymakers, to investors, and to the whole GovTech ecosystem in Lithuania, Estonia, Scotland, Spain. So this is something that individually I would not be able to offer. Governments and the organizations, they will be very limited. At the same time, it was also very risky because and also for you to not to have an unattainable vision of what it was. We didn't really know what it would look like. So that's part of the beauty of sharing the risks. And that had an effect that now has encouraged other initiatives within the organizations we come from to take this leap of faith and interact with partners in a different way. But there are a lot of the whys, and the spillover effect that we see is a huge one. And it also, there's our why, and also there is the why of the institution we are in. So we also, not to be naive, we also have to translate that interest in order to buy, let's say, to gain political buy-in, because for instance, for an initiative like that, when we didn't actually know how it would look like in the future, it's crucial that we pitch our ideas and projects in a way that resonates also with the interests of the institutions we are in. So it's also important, to try to map the stakeholders in a way that how to sell it and how to frame it in a way that makes sense. So it will depend a lot on the type of organization we are working with.
And absolutely, Sylvia. And so that's key. What we find is how you tap or tag the program that you're trying to run and how that has relevance to the different drivers. So be it policy and how you develop better policy. It might be economic development, how you ensure that you're hitting those drivers. But it's one of these the challenges we find is that we are all salespeople. We are all in the business of selling, whether we like it or not. And that is very difficult for many public servants. But we have to adapt our message. There's a whole product market fit, to use entrepreneurial terminology, around ensuring that these programs are absorbed sufficiently into the organization. We'll come on to one of the case studies, but come in there, do.
Yeah, I just have a small comment on the benefits of cross-government collaborations from a tech perspective, coming from the Technical University of Denmark. So I'm working together with Professor Jan Madsen, who's a deep tech person. And one of the things that we're seeing when we look into tech is that tech is, you can't not be part of the development of technology. It will be there. So one of the things that is a huge benefit of these programs is actually that you get to get the newest tech across borders. And the issue on startups and the whole thinking around GovTech, I have a quote from Nima and Christine, who are the co-founders of Blue Lobster, and they say startups have the agility to make decisions and test and implement them quickly, whereas slow-moving governments have the power to make successful changes. We both have a lot to learn and a lot to gain from each other. And I think that hits the point of that when you do this, talking about climate challenges, that goes cross borders, we need startups. We need to find those new tech companies who can actually work with governments, across governments, and come with solutions that can actually solve the problems that we are having in front of us and which will impact our future. And we need to go and find those. And having this kind of cross-government collaboration programs are needed to be a driver and get a broader perspective on our governments and help. I think that was one of the things when we talked about this, you can talk, but you can also act on it. And I think this strong why from a lot of the program partners was we want to prove that we can do the difference. And we want to push it back to our governments, that we can also from below actually do something to showcase how it could be done. So this was kind of one way of proving that we can do something, each of us.
And you might have heard the Lithuanian minister on the main stage talk about an example from Brazil. So Skipopoulos was one of the Brazilian companies that came through the program, and they are now working in a Lithuanian municipality and helping them looking at some of their climate adaptation and emissions monitoring. The book I'd mentioned was The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato.
Yeah, and Alex, if I may add, I think it's really a nice issue that you brought, because the startups that were like the scale-ups involved in the program, they got to interact with, as I said, different innovation ecosystems in the world. And by the time they come back from that experience, they are also enriching the ecosystems they are coming from. So it really, if we, and now I'm saying, thinking of on the role of governments, if we are able to leverage that and take, really make sure that we benefit from the exposure that we are also providing to them, then it's crucial. Because as you said, we had some startups that are now pivoting and having the first implementation in the different countries of the program. And sometimes it's even beneficial, because sometimes they were not having the visibility in their own country, but by the time they go to a different country, they say, hey, but I'm also having my solution implemented in Lithuania, or I have an agreement, like I'm closing a contract with the Scottish government. Then, also the local governments and organizations say, wait a minute, where were you? And then they were there all the time. So I think it's also about how do we also, make sure we take those profits of that visibility and interconnectivity back, because as we were saying, the solution for a massive environmental challenge in Lithuania might come from Brazil and vice versa. So it also, if our also companies, they have that exposure and they gain competitiveness abroad, they will also enhance our business environment at home.
Thanks, Sylvia. And that ties into two questions that came through, which was what work is being done on distributing the results of successful projects within the community. There you have an example. Okay, and I'm going to link that with the other question, which was how can you make sure that multiple governments don't impose product requirements on innovative scale-ups? It's hard enough on one geography to stay user first. And so there's a whole thing about the relationship. So these GovTech programs, such as GovTech Lab Lithuania, CivTech Scotland, they are the bridge builders, the translators between government teams and entrepreneurship. And therein lie a number of the keys of successes between those translators to help both the public sector understand the way of thinking of an entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur to navigate the vagaries of the public sector. But it's a really interesting point, Olivia, with the product requirement question, is that that's about developing a platform and a solution that is 80% platform and 20% is customizable. So, and I think there's another dimension here, which is how you balance domestic economic development agenda, growing your own base, versus taking in technologies from other sides. But this comes to the point around, actually, if a problem's big enough, actually, why reinvent the wheel? You could be spending and developing, yes, your homegrown solutions, but actually, if there's something else, let's use it. Which comes to one of the questions, which is away from the climate tech piece, but more about X-Road. It's a great interoperability tool. Why is it not embraced by more countries, especially when it is open sourced? Whether you use X-Road as an example, Jamie, why might there be blockers in other countries adopting other technologies?
I think, a lot of ones that we see, there's often a bit of a not invented here syndrome where they feel like the projects need to be originated there for them to be valuable there. But I think that my job is to find interesting, innovative initiatives going on in one country or one region and trying to sow the seeds of replication for those. I think there's a bit of cultural inertia and that we're trying to overcome in picking up and diffusing these different processes. But I think it's more of I think people do try to adopt and replicate these things. It happens all the time. I think that there's a little bit less of a focus of contextualizing these. There's a little bit of a belief sometimes that you can just lift and shift one initiative from one country over to another, but there's a tremendous amount of foundation and culture and practice that's built underneath that needs to be considered first. And whether it'll even be accepted by the civil servants or the citizens involved, I think that there needs to be that bit of a contextualization layer built in there. I do see it happening, and it happens quite a lot. So I think it's more about the way it's applied.
So, and that links in with a question that's come in around how... Oh, sorry, do you want to just add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add on it, because I also think that some of it is... I think there is definitely this culture, but I also think there is a language barrier, and there is a contact barrier. One of the things that we saw in the program was that, as Sylvia said, we became the bridges to get into government institutions and get the connections on getting the startups to know who to contact within the government to be able to scale their startups. So, and I think one thing, I think all of you working with GovTech knows that it's difficult for startups just to know who to contact in government. So just imagine if you should call a different country and figure out which ministry is it that you need to talk to. So I think one of the things that this is doing is leveraging that possibility to actually get the context, so starting to engage with governments, because I don't see kind of a negative, like we don't want to work with startups from other countries. I rather see this that how do we do it? How do we get in contact with each other? And I think these kind of programs can help that both language barrier, but also the barrier of knowing who to contact, because ministries are not alike. You might have a ministry in Denmark that has procurement in one ministry, but it might be in another ministry in another country. So just figuring out who should I talk to if I want to talk to the person who can help me in this exactly problem. That's an issue, and I think this kind of programs helps on trying to find a way to start having that engagement across countries and giving those contacts.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about the why, where some of the opportunities for collaboration is, and we've probably got about 3 or so minutes left. Let's think about the tips for success. So if you could pick out some ingredients for making these collaboration programs work, so that's the how. Jamie, what do you take?
Sure, based on what we've seen in working with governments, I'd say there's a few things. One is picking up, and I think it's one of the most important, is picking up where we talked about selling these things and marketing them and trying to get buy-in for it. I think you have to be careful how you do that. It's very important, but I think the seeds of failure with a lot of projects we've seen are when people try to sell it and they put forth the expectation of, equal benefit. And I think equal benefit for these types of projects is never going to happen. I think that the goal should be everybody benefits, but there's so many variables, so many different actors, so many different contexts going on that there's, one, very difficult to measure in most cases, but then two, the benefits are almost never going to be equal. Someone's going to benefit more than someone else, and that needs to be the expectation going in. But if everybody benefits, that's great. I'd say another one of the key factors that we've seen is someone or team whose job is to work in the middle, to be this cross-border facilitator. And that can't be someone who, optimally, won't be someone who's associated with the government side or the tech side or whose job really is to work in the middle and to build trust among these different collaborators. So my favorite example that I touched on earlier is the Open European Dialogue, who has a team that in the middle whose job is to convene and to structure and to guide, but not have a vested interest in any one of the parties. I'd say another one is, that there's not a lot of focus on is, just being a good partner and knowing that it takes time and that you need to invest in being a good partner over a long duration in order to build the roots of the collaboration out. Sometimes people or groups give up after a few months or a year, but when things are just about to hit their stride. And then finally, I'd say, just kind of a technical point of view, it would be, don't build new structures unless you have to. We see a lot of groups who think that we have a new initiative, let's build a new structure around it, and that's going to lead the thing. Sometimes it's necessary. Do it only if you absolutely need to. You should work with or adapt the other structures that exist before trying to overcomplicate things with building something new.
Jamie, thank you. Sylvia, few moments on success factors.
Okay, so I think the most important thing would be identifying what are the values that you share, because as Jamie mentioned, each one will get like slightly different outcomes out of it, but if you manage to meet everyone at some point, because back home, I mean, you have a mandate to execute, but if you find those common values and you build on that and trying to get as much as diversity for the nature of the organizations involved as possible, because you will also find complementary skills and strengths that will, you will learn from for future projects.
Absolutely, that common values. Me?
I totally agree on what you said, and I think those are really important things, but I would add to that vulnerability. I think, and I have to go to Brené Brown and just say, this about knowing that you're going into the unknown together, sharing that responsibility, also enables you to listen to the others, and knowing that we share this experience together and we're building it together. So having that vulnerability to open up to each other. And I think part of the success with the GSUP was also that we were on COVID, so we were in each other's houses all the time, looking at the cats and the children, and when people got sick and people sitting in there like with nosy noses, and it was just a wonderful experience, but it also gained trust in each other. It showcased that we were all human beings and we were all trying our bests. And I think if we can kind of go into collaborations knowing that we're all in it together, that's the way forward.
In it all together, which is a brilliant note to end on. So my thanks to you here physically. I know thanks to those who posted questions. There were loads of questions there, which I didn't end up asking. Thanks to folks as far away as Aaron in Australia, South Australia. Thank you for tuning in. It's I think about 11 p.m. for your time. And Jamie, Sylvia, me, thank you very much.